Okay. Hello. Good morning, attendees in Zoom. Can you hear us? Yes. Okay.
So I will start with introducing Anna Murashova. I'm very delighted to introduce you. Currently, Anna Murashova holds a PhD fellowship at the Leibniz Zentrum für Zeithistorische Forschung in Potsdam. Her home university is the University of Tartu, where she works on a thesis on authors and authorship on the Russian self-publishing literary platforms on the internet. The talk she gives today arose probably in the context of this project. Its title is Digitalisation of Novel Practices, Hierarchies, Texts, the Russian Case. The respondent to the talk of Anna Murashova will be given by Isabell Meske, but will be read by Aurore. So there is no need to introduce Isabell Meske more in detail. As far as I know, she is teacher in Hannover, and that is also the reason why she isn't able to be here on Zoom today. So please join me in welcoming Anna Murashova. I guess I think so, yeah.
Sorry to disturb you. We don't hear you anymore.
Better? Yes. How should we? Yes, please. Okay, yes, thank you. Here is the title of my paper that I sent before this workshop started. And actually, thank you. You already stated my main research focus and the title of my PhD project. And for this paper, I had a bit to adjust my approaches because I not deal with some political issues or with the novels, but I need to shift my attention to the political dimensions to fit more neatly to this research workshop. And of course, generally in my project, I cannot avoid these political issues because literature doesn't exist in vacuum, especially the Russian literature, which was always more than literature. And the case I'm presenting is local. I consider myself as a area researcher, and I think that locality is one of the key points of it. So my paper will be unfolded in like two parts in two dimensions. And one is more sociological, about the historical context of existing literature on the internet, about practices more than a text. And the second one will be about the text and the content and approaches that could be used in studying it. And I will try not to retell the whole text of my paper, but just state main thesis and arguments from it. So, okay. So the first part is about the development of the internet as a political and geopolitical imaginary and source for identity construction. And in this whole paper, I use the idea of sovereignty and digital sovereignty, which is definitely political, and show how Russian-speaking online space from the beginning was completely free of any borders and was used for any Russian-speaking people across the world. And during some political enactment of Russian actions of Russian government and war in Ukraine, and all of these things, it became some over-regulated space with strong state presence and strong state control. And this is completed article published in the first Monday, a year ago in 2023. And there are some points that internet in Russia was formed as a political idea in opposing to USA. The Conrad Schmidt shows it very well. And it was formed around the book collections of Tamizdat and Samizdat, to which the early immigrants of post-USSR took the access and in being immigrated in USSR, different countries, and they digitized them and uploaded onto this early internet, and across these pages and these collections, this idea of internet in Russia was formed. And the book presence was always strong, especially in the early years of the development of Russian internet. And national-based platform for publishing and for digitized collection were founded. Here is maybe the most famous project of it. It's the Moscow Library. Here how it looks in early 2000. And they published both the digitized version of collection of Russian classics and other texts from Russian literature, and also the newly written text. And in the first decade of 21st century, almost every Russian book or written in Russian language was accessible around the world. Here I state the citation from the Gorny work. Evgeny Gorny was one of the key figures of early Russian internet development. And despite this existing geographical borders and geopolitical identity, Russian-speaking people has access to all this was published in Russia, and they communicate freely. And in this early time, this internet was recognized as a space without any borders, space for free information circulation. It was like an emancipation, continuing emancipation from Soviet legacy with censorship, with state control, and this internet development was like a freedom for representation, authorial intention, and free for free information circulation. And in the 2010s, was launched the platforms with the commercial possibility of using, where users can not only publish, but also to sell their works. It was like Litera, Litera Samizdat, Author Today, Reader.ro, and I will say more about them in the second part. And my point is here is again that every Russian-speaking, Russian-writing author could publish and sell their work, regardless of nationality, citizenship, place of living, and so on. And most people there were from post-Soviet, from Russia, but also from post-Soviet countries and other countries. And after the invasion of Ukraine, this community was broken because of economic sanctions, and when Visa and MasterCard stopped their operations in Russia, and the books became inaccessible. Books from Russia that was published in Russian platforms became inaccessible for those who lived outside Russia, and vice versa, for the books published outside Russia became inaccessible for books for those who lived inside Russia. But it's not the only aspect. There are a few of them. This is quote to my article. I did give the detailed analysis of this case about this borders and bordering. And what I find the more interesting regarding this political dimension of existence of literature, that the actually literary platform and publishing on Russian platform in Russian language becomes a political stance and a political action. Because the founder of one of the platforms, Litnet, was operating on Russian language on the Russian market, was a Ukrainian citizen. And the team was located in the Ukraine, and some authors were from Ukraine. And after the invasion, these founders claimed that he supports Ukrainian military force with the money he made with LitNet. And some authors from Ukraine decide to leave the platform because they don't want to support Russian literature and publish in Russian anymore. Some authors from Russia feared of prosecuting for being published on their platforms. Money from which is used to support the Ukrainian military forces. So there was a big conflict, and then LitNet administration started to limit this publishing possibilities for authors who lived in Russia. And then, but it was not successful. And then this Ukrainian founder sold his part of the platform to Russian-based Horst, and declared that investing in the development of Russian literature was a mistake. And after this news, some users on the platforms placed Russian flags on their pages on the platform and placed the slogan "LitNet is ours." It's a reference to the slogan "Kreuzmair is ours," which was disseminated after the 2014. This is the case how the publishing is recognized as political action, and it appears that the worldwide this community of Russian-speaking people is broken, and yeah, and so referring to the yesterday talks about nations and about net culture is organized with not the borders, but with some links or networks. I do not agree. Borders exist. We are just not see them when the state is, so to say, normal and stable, because they are invisible, and all these semantic boundaries we just notice. Because from the historical perspective, this case was almost 3 years ago, and when all it was starting to happen, all these constraints became very visible and noticeable. Now the situation, the configuration is different. The situation is a bit different, but it's stable. And these boundaries, again, are not visible for us. Yeah, and these borders organized by domain zones, by some financial restrictions, state politics, political views of users, and national. So the national specificity exists not only in the cyberspace, not like cyberspace territoriality, but also which coincide these geographical constraints. And now I am turning back to the self-publishing platforms. Here is one of example how it looks like. It's exactly the LitNet. I spoke in the previous part. This is like a rating of romance novel. And please do not be mistaken with the translation. It's automatic translation in the browser for those who don't speak and don't understand Russian. So there is no English language interface. It's just for more to be more understandable. And majority of text published there belongs of formulaic popular genres. On LitNet prevails romance novels, including some different kinds, some like a fantasy romance novel, contemporary romance novel, historical romance novel, and so. And on Author Today, the genre settings is different. It's time travel, military fantasy, literature, and some other, so to say, male genre. And a majority of these texts are digital born. Because they are published firstly on the internet, but they are not digital in the terms we discussed yesterday, because they are straightforward narratives without any non-linearity, any interaction, hypertextual or something. But and they are written by one author or co-authors, but readers doesn't take any part of them, just read and discuss them. Yeah, so my point here is that this is a territory of authors. No editorial filter, no some control over the text, and everyone who wants can publish, and even to sell if they obtain some popularity and obtain some ratings. So also for those who doesn't fit any conventions of or editorial view, what is publishable or what are not, could come to the platform and publish and disseminate their writings here. And here I refer to the Terleton's Gillespie idea that the platforms, it's like an egalitarian arrangement, promising support to those who stands upon and give them a public voice. This is for me also the closer related to Frederick Jameson idea that the text is not just one cultural artifact, but it's like a phenomenon of collective discourse. And I see the platformization of literary production, or even probably broader, the cultural production, as an instrument and possibility for representation and expression for those who are previously marginalized, who doesn't fit any conventions in terms of, for example, literary quality or not. And these groups which are represented and came to platform for this representation could be very different. With Raban's novel, it's more clear because it's general consensus that Raban's novels are inherently political, and they deals with topics that are not generally represented in general fiction novels, such as pregnancy or child raising. In my opinion, here it doesn't matter whether authors put explicitly their political statement or not, because this is how unconscious work. This popular culture is what being represented, so they are writing something, and this like a representation of current states and ideas and how this constructions of society works. And there are a lot of stories about rapes, subordinates, forced marriage, abusement, cruelty, male heroes who are very cruel and aggressive. And women need a space to articulate this experience, and the platforms give them such space. And of course, the romance novel is from the point of like a high literature or something, was often very derided genre. It's like a women rubbish. That doesn't deserve some attention, but still it's like a form of obtaining female agency. It's like a form of reflections of female voices. And I see here a possibility to analyze this text more deeply and to bring some close reading methods and to bring the context of Russian context to global feminist and romance novel studies, and to understand how this gender role and family is represented. And how it served both a normative prescription of family construction, but also how it is worked as a mean of women empowerment. And here is one of the book I mentioned of the paper, I Live Too Long Without You. It's a story about a woman who got pregnant and suddenly discovered that her husband cheated on her. She divorced and started to live her own life with her newborn daughter. So it's the novel is not completed yet, but still it's the way that the representation that the woman can live their own life without happy marriage, and like reflections on this some traumatic experience like treason or something else. And the novel is not completed yet, so probably the ending will be different, and the heroine will find the new spouse, which to be frank, as a reader, I prefer that that she doesn't find him and live alone without any man. And with the author today, the case is a bit different because the plots of accidental travel or alternative history, there are a lot of text about hero moving back to USSR or Russian Empire or getting the alternative historical fantasy world. And they could be considered as a reflection on historical part, and in some cases an attempt of resentment and rewriting history. And this is not new situation for Russian publishing and for Russian book market. Here is an example of one book series printed in printed houses in 2010s, which also deals with these issues about getting to the past and changing the course of history. Yeah, but still these stories that are published on the author today could be so marginalized or discriminated because of its lower quality and graphomania, and it's also like a trash that normal readers that doesn't read. And the another difference is that in the contrary with romance novel, author of this text are aware of possible political perception of their novels, and readers are overcatch this intention. And here is an example I also give in a paper that I'm even not sure that I translated correctly the title in my paper, or how this translation, automatic translation, deals with this word, because it's very specific words, like means like thin, big man who, yeah, but in the course of the story, he obtains some powers that no man in this world have. But this is a story about some Russian pensioner, some renter who died and who got into the fantasy world where Varyagan Empire, it's an allegory of Russian states, conducts a war with Slavia, a republic to the southwest of empire, which, according to author, thought had fallen under the influence of the enemies of the empire. And you see, this is like an epigraph of author. He anticipates his story, but saying, yes, it's fantasy invented world, no analogies with the reality. But for me, it looked like more the author plays with his readers. And of course, he knows that he is doing something very actual and very political. And readers catch his intention because there was some comments. So, okay, we are trying to escape this current political situation, but here it is in the text. Yeah, so it's, as I said, this part about romance novel and this text are only like possible thoughts what could be done. And the two concluding remarks that firstly, my observation from about the platforms as a space for representation and more free authorial invention in terms it looks a bit outdated because and a bit contradict to my first part about state control and regulated space. Because we see now this control over the content on almost all platforms, big platforms such as Facebook or Twitter or something. So, and the text of Gillespie, which I referred to, was written in 2010, so it's quite a time. And the second remark is that all this practices and texts that I showed, they are still on the margins on literary production, both in terms of hierarchy and about the market numbers, because it's like a 10% of the whole book market in Russia. I avoid the part about algorithm and hierarchies, but this is the part I'm working right now and hope to complete it in my PhD project as well. So thank you. That's mainly all.
Thank you very much. I guess we go on directly with the response before we discuss, and Aurore will read the text we've been sent.
Yeah, actually, thank you. I won't read it because it's very long and very precise. So I will send you the text, of course, and then you can start a dialogue with Isabell, who read your paper with great attention, as far as I can see by her response. So I won't read it in length, but maybe mention a few points she writes about. I had the impression she's very much interested into parallels with other situations nationally. Um, because I mean, so I will read. You describe a peculiarity of critical political literature that emerges in dictatorships or authoritarian regimes, and here are historical, for example, Germany during the Third Reich, or political comparisons with Syria, China, available, which might broaden the insight into literary spheres in culturally and politically suppressed environments. So maybe we can address this in the discussion, how the situation you described or mentioned is comparable with other situation historically and geographically. What can I also say? Sorry. Yeah, she's also very much interested, and indeed, it is a question we can ask ourselves of the current trend, given the situation since 2022. And she mentions Russia's growing isolation, which has repercussion on the Russian internet. So her question is, what's the recent trend on this? And again, she makes parallels with German literature of the 1930s and 40s, where exile literature could no longer be read in its native linguistic space, and domestic authors try to endure the regime. So she speaks about this exile situation, like people who get to escape the regime, but also like the interne migrations yeah, from the inside, and what repercussion it has in terms of free speech and writing. And maybe last point, she asked if there is any space for satire left on these platforms, and tries to compare the situation with the Western circumstances. So I will read. Much of the politically engaged literary discourse in the West occurs on social media platforms such as YouTube or Instagram, where authors manage their own pages and channels, often supported by publishers or agents. And she mentions Kamina, for example, here in Germany. So they openly participate in political discourse. And in contrast, in the Russian-speaking world, this discourse has largely shifted to text-based platforms. Are there any other forms of literary expression available that allow free or something similar to free speech? And maybe just a last point, she read with attention what you said about this gendered repartition onto these platforms, and she calls herself a septic. How far does that really go? Like this women agency you mentioned. How does it really happening? How trivial or commonplace are the texts, and how critical it is? Yeah, maybe I'll stop there.
Thank you, Aurora, for replying me, and I hope that I will have a chance to thank Isabell for her response. And I will probably start from the end about gender and women agency. Actually, what I see is a very wide representation of different agencies and different plot. But for me, it's just things to be done. So it's like more the project, and like maybe for future possible research is a problem which I'm going to deal with. I started firstly when I came there to the platform and started to read this, like, oh yeah, this is really some opposition to patriarchy. They're representing this empowered, emancipated women that lives their own lives and who they deals with their own things and topics. But now I'm coming to the conclusion that no, that is still very patriarchal, because in, for example, in even in the some like feministic novel from the author, autorin, I would say, because most of them are representing female and femininity, and but even in that, so to say, feministic novel, with okay, definitely woman agency about her choices of, for example, of sex or having sex with the man or not, her own desire. But still, the point is that in the end, she have a man. She married him, and they live their happy family life. And she is still feminine, very feminine. And this model of patriarchal culture that every woman needs a man, it still works there. So yes, there are some agencies and some topics which are probably not represented in general fiction or in fiction that published, some romance novel that published on publishing houses, but still they're very patriarchal.
Maybe because we are running out of time, if we want to have the discussion in the round, I would suggest that you don't give an answer to every single point, but that we open now, if that is okay for you.
Yes, just maybe some few words about this free speech. Actually on the platform, there are, especially now, they're started to avoid this explicit political discussion and explicit political expression, because they fear to be prosecuted and they are not want to deal with. So for authors, it's just like a metaphor or allegory, but explicitly it doesn't say. So I would not say that is some space of free speech. Okay.
Thank you. So any question in the audience? Yes.
And I'll try and hold it close to my mouth today. Thanks very much, Anna, for the paper. I really liked the content, which I was completely unaware of. So thank you. It's interesting. I think I had some questions about the link between the first half and the second half of the paper. And one of the questions that I wondered about was this use of the word platform. And sorry, and I'm still not holding it close. And I wondered if you knew Nick Cernacek's work on platform capitalism. And one of the kind of claims that he makes in that work is that platforms, well, capitalism generally strives for monopoly, but that platforms strive for market dominance, which requires more and more users. And so one of the questions I have then about the content is how much, if at all, you think this is tailored to generate a market. You have a kind of interesting comment about authors following successful trends on the platform, and I guess I wonder whether that's something that's kind of built into the architecture of these sites.
Thank you. Actually, about the link between the first part and the second part, there is no no links. They are very separate, and maybe this is also just a job to be done to manage these links, because the first part is completed, and it was completed like 2 years ago. So, and this second part I started only recently, so I still have to link them. And about this platform capitalism and trending the successful factors, of course, this is like a loop between hierarchies between algorithm and the users who came there to write something, because they some authors told me that yes, the platform came there to have some experiments for experimenting with genre or something. We want to write something new or unformed, but okay, no, we are trying. No, we're not successful. We are not in the trends. And they definitely, in the end, they are starting to adapt their strategies, their writing processes, their contents, even to feed these trends and to feed this algorithm. So, so it's like a. Is that you mean in your question? So it's like a loop between authors who are coming and trying to create something new, but they're not being evaluated well by algorithms and have to follow these trends. So like sometimes they some new topics on new plots arises, but still authors have to guide them in order to be successful. Is it the answer or not?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. Do you know other covers generated by AI? They look like they're AI to me, but
there is some discussion of text generated by AI, and the authors will be replaced by this or not. But now I think that authors won't be replaced by AI. So yes, artists who create their covers, they used AI a lot, but the text maybe with the help, but I think that is more like to the discussion of the text we will have today later, because I think that there is some there will be always some space for authors to create something.
I like the question that Isabell posed about the place for satire, because it was, I mean, like this genre of, I forgot the name for it in Russian, but this genre of traveling through time, traveling back, like the traveling back through time, and then kind of changing the course of history. The only title I know is Chapayev and Pustota by, I think it was by Pelevin. Which is a completely satirical work. So, and that's something you wouldn't expect from the titles you showed us. That kind of a work, or that platform would, of course, accept or publish Pelevin. So, I mean, is there like evidently platforms of that kind, given the political situation, do not allow for dissident writing, or perhaps only give, like authors the chance to give some glimpses of feminine subversion or something like that, not even feminist subversion. But is there kind of nowadays, does the analog medium, something like Samizdat in its original version, take on the role of like dissident publishing? Because like what we heard in the first paper yesterday, like this hope that the digital medium internet would kind of allow for openness, and what you kind of criticized in a sense, like this optimistic hope is evidently gone. So is now like a place for political actions by writing and publishing again in illegally distributed samizdat, or is that does not happen at all?
Thank you. Yes, about the point about satire, I think that, and dissident writing, I think that it's a bit more complicated than the authors on this platform do, because authors write for entertaining and for receiving the money. And if you are writing some satire or some dissident co-writing, you are not going there for because it's not commercial. But of course there are a lot of stories like this kind, but with humor, and I think that there could be an examples with some like a satire of irony of some political situations or something. But I haven't met them, but I assume that they exist and they could be. And about this. Uncensored publishing, actually, I think that old analog and printed book allowed more space for these dissident practices, because in online space, firstly, they are more visible, and it's very simple to just to ban the website, to erode the content and to delete the contents in the content on the platform. And when you have a printed book, and even especially when it's already disseminated to someone, this printed book will exist. It will stay as it is. So I think that analog media has more power for resistance in that case than online media. This printed book, there may be a situation then typography doesn't want to print this, but when they print, it's always there. And online on online platform, and especially on social media, it's not.
I take that one. It's not. Yeah, I realized that before. All right. So thank you very much. And now we change to the next panel. Can you hear me, Sophie? Yeah? All right. So it is my pleasure to introduce Sophie Salvo to you very bravely. She talks from Chicago, where it is in the middle of the night right now. Is that true? Yeah? Okay. Sophie Salvo is assistant professor in the Department of Germanic Studies at the University of Chicago. Her research interests are, among others, German literature and culture in the 19th and 21st century, feminist and gender studies, and last but not least, political literature and the novel. In 2024, her study with the title Articulating Difference, Sex and Language in the German 19th Century has been published at University of Chicago Press. One of her current projects is on the fate of the political novel in the 21st century. As you can imagine, that is something Capone is very interested in too. I will, as I didn't in the last panel, because we had the respondent here with us, but now I'm happy to introduce right at the what will follow the presentation from Sophie is the responding part that will be done by Elias Kreuzmair, whom I know more than 10 years. That means I could give you a pretty long introduction, but unfortunately, I'm not supposed to do that. So what follows are only the most important things. Currently, Elias is wissenschaftlicher Mitarbeiter at the, I think, wonderful SFB Transformation des Populären, Transformations of the popular and works on entertainment popular magazines. I wasn't too sure how to translate Unterhaltungsmagazine, but I think you get the idea. Before he was postdoc in the DFG project Schreibweisen der Gegenwart at the University Greifswald. His thesis is published in 2020 and has the title Pop und Tod, Schreiben nach der Theorie. Please join me in giving Sophie Salvo and Elias a very warm welcome.
Can you hear me okay?
We can't hear you.
You can't hear me?
But that is probably our.
Online you can hear me, right?
Could you please say something so we can check if we can
Hello,
hear you now?
can you hear me now?
No?
Hello, is it working now? Thanks. Yeah, I think it's working online, but not
Could you please
in
say
person.
something? No?
Can you hear me? Is it working now in person?
No?
I don't know. Is it?
Sophia, are you still there?
I'm there. Yeah, can you hear me? Come in, come in.
Online, I can hear you this way of the world.
Yeah, I got that. Thank you.
Shall we make it? Sophie, can you say something? We think we
Come in Berlin. Can you
Yeah.
hear me? Okay. Great.
Yeah.
Thank you. And yeah, let me start by thanking you so much for and allowing me to participate in this. This is really a new project for me, so I feel like I'm learning a lot from people who know a lot more than I do about the topic of the political novel. And then the caveat, as you mentioned, it is 3 a.m. here in Chicago, so hopefully I'm coherent, but if not, we can hash things out in the discussion perhaps. Okay, so I'll just get started. In the 2002 novella Crabwalk, Gunter Grass makes his narrator confront his shortcomings head on. By his own admission, Paul Pokrivka is a bad father, a bad son, and certainly a bad romantic partner. Set in the present day of its publication with a glance backward toward the trials of German history, Crabwalk tells interweaving stories of violence, hatred, and misunderstanding. The title alludes to the way that Grass's narrator tacks between multiple historical events, including the ascension of Wilhelm Gustloff to Nazi leader in Switzerland in the 1930s, Gustloff's eventual murder by the Jewish student David Frankfurter, the Nazi ship named in Gustloff's honor, which first took Germans on pleasure cruises through the Kraft Deutsche Freude campaign, but then met a disastrous end as a Nazi naval vessel in 1945, and the online resurrection of Gustloff by the 21st century's far right, as he is celebrated through anti-Semitic vitriol on websites and in chat rooms, and then in person. Only this last part is Grass's invention. Only if I, born fatherless, had never become a father, Paul laments as he sits in court awaiting his son's conviction for murdering a Jew out of perverted loyalty to the long-dead Gustloff. When his wife leaves him, calling Paul a lost cause, he simply agrees. She was right. Grass's narrator is politically as well as interpersonally challenged, apathetic, and rarely voting. Most damningly, he is a bad participant in German memory culture. He considers that if he had talked to his son, Connie, about German suffering during the war, Connie would not have sought the information from neo-Nazis and would never have been radicalized. This last point about Paul as representative of problems in German memory culture has been the focus of much of the scholarship on Grass's novella, and with good reason, as it centers on the Russian sinking of the Nazi ship, the Wilhelm Gustloff, which was carrying soldiers as well as fleeing German civilians, including thousands of children. The plot of Crabwalk hinges precisely on the ethics of acknowledging German suffering in World War II. Phrases like narrative normalization, Germans as victims, and witness and testimony have dominated both scholarly and popular discussions of the text, as debates about Grass's narrative have become proxy for debates about how to remember the Germans expelled from the East towards the war's end. One thing that has garnered less attention, however, is that Paul Puklivka is not just an absent father and a middling citizen, but also a bad writer. I know my limitations, he concedes. I'm a run-of-the-mill journalist who can do a decent job for short stretches. This is not exactly false modesty. He writes without conviction, having spent his career, quote, shredding all sorts of subjects to be served up as articles, end quote. First as a reporter for the right-leaning Springer tabloids, then for the left-leaning Tageszeitung, and then freelance. In his younger years, he even took a creative writing class based on the American model, he tells us, but the instructor decided that Paul didn't have what it takes to write real literature. A Kolportageroman was the best he could hope for. This instructor turns out to be Grass himself, who appears in the plot simply as he, the shadowy figure propelling Paul to write the text that we now hold in our hands. Although Grass is not named directly, he and this character are clearly self-same, since the instructor refers to his own literary output, specifically his mighty tome Dog Years, which Grass published in 1963. The justification that the character Grass gives for why Paul should be the one to write about the fate of the Gustloff and all that surrounds it is twofold. First, Grass apparently doesn't have it in him. Quote, he says, quote, around the mid-60s, he'd had it with the past. The voracious present with its incessant now had kept him from producing the mere 200 pages, end quote. Second, Paul has a unique biographical connection to the ship. His mother boarded the ill-fated vessel while pregnant with Paul, and he was born on a rescue boat, apparently, as the Gustloff sank into the sea. These explanations for the novella's conceit of authorship may be logical enough within the diegesis, but they don't adequately explain why Grass, the author, structures the text in this way. In other words, why he ventriloquizes his intervention into contemporary memory politics through a bad writer. Crabwalk is arguably Grass's most accessible and most politically engaged text. It is a few hundred pages long compared to the 700 plus pages of The Tin Drum or Dog Years, and it received significant attention by the public and in the media upon its publication, briefly pushing 2 Harry Potter novels from the top of the Spiegel bestseller list, as Helmut Schmitz reports, an attention that Grass himself cultivated. Crabwalk is, furthermore, the book that is set most immediately in the present and the most directly takes up the present's political concerns. What does it mean, then, in a text that was so clearly intended to become part of public discourse, that Grass chooses a mediocre writer to be its narrator? There are, as we all know very well, a myriad of established theories about what literature can and cannot do in the world, what political literature should or should not look like, whether it should be realist, avant-garde, or something in between, whether style should take precedence over content or vice versa, whether it should facilitate a reading experience that is identificatory or alienating or educational or pleasurable or something else entirely. In this paper, I'm less interested in theories of political literature, be they prescriptive or descriptive, than I am in how literature's relationship to the political has been understood by literary texts themselves, in this case specifically by Grass's novella. How can subversive writing be both dynamite and of literary quality? Grass had asked in his 1999 Nobel Prize acceptance speech. Is there time enough to wait for the delayed action? Is any book capable of supplying a commodity in so short supply as the future? Is it not rather the case that literature is currently retreating from public life and that young writers are using the internet as a playground? What is to be done? In what follows, Grass provides no clear solution, only a tongue-in-cheek reference to Sisyphus and then an abrupt switch to the topic of world hunger. 3 years later, as Crabwalk appears on German bookshelves, he seems still to be haunted by similar questions. For as I would like to suggest, Crabwalk has a vexed relationship to its own status as literature. The genre it declares through its subtitle, novella, is a term both descriptive and derogatory. Yes, the text is about generational divides, about German victimhood and the long shadow of Nazi crimes, about the far right's appeal to disaffected youth, but it is also about the function of literary narrative and what political utility, if any, it may claim. Critics disagree about whether Crabwalk should be considered a novel or a novella, and I'll spare you the sort of internal debates of secondary scholarship, but a look at the text self-characterization does not exactly illuminate the issue. On the one hand, there's the title page, the unequivocal Im Klebsgang einer Novelle. On the other hand, there's the opening to chapter 6, where Grass has the narrator write, I'll just read the translation. He says, my report would make a good novella, a literary assessment with which I can't concern myself. I merely report the following. Not only does the narrator disavow the literariness of his work, but so too does his verb mood. In the German, he writes here in the language of journalism, Konjunktiv 1, or reported speech, suggesting that Grass, who is supposed to be the editor rather than the author of the text, slapped on the title of novella, even though it doesn't quite fit. This writing teacher, Elias Grass, had once sized up Paul as destined for nothing more than a Kolportageroman, and this is arguably basically what he ends up producing. This genre has an extensive, if rather undistinguished history, and now a very brief foray into the history of this genre, if you'll bear with me. So the word colportage comes from the French colporteur, a term for a traveling book salesman who would carry his wares in a tray around his neck, selling them door to door. In the 17th and 18th centuries, they hawked exclusively religious media, but beginning in the second half of the 19th century, this sales practice expanded beyond the religious context. As literacy increased among the lower classes and book purchasing boomed, publishers responded by producing serialized novels that had short, easy-to-read installments, often with illustrations that appealed to current tastes. As Ronald Fullerton writes, publishers attempted to attract lower-class readers by deliberately printing in a crude type style reminiscent of old-fashioned devotional works and school books, physical reminders, in other words, of books to which the lower classes had long been exposed, end quote. The market flourished. Between 1870 and 1880, there were approximately 200 publishers putting out this kind of text. Favorite topics included not only haunted castles and royal exploits, although these were covered quite well, but also recent wars and political events, such as the Dreyfus Affair. Indeed, many novels were written immediately after, if not already during, the events they depicted, such as the 1850 novel 1849, Oder des Königs Marienblüter by one Franz Dostoyevsky. Politische, historische und soziale Romane aus der Gegenwart were popular subtitles. Such texts often understood themselves to be intervening in contemporary politics. For example, one 1869 novel opens by proclaiming that, quote, the right of the novelist to harmoniously interweave political and social questions with the creations of his imagination and thereby to bring rather abstract subjects closer to general understanding is today as indubitable as it is unchallenged, end quote. Obviously, there's much that differentiates Grass's novella from the Kolportageroman. Crabwalk is neither serialized nor printed in Gothic script, and it bears the hallmarks of postmodernism that would have been unthinkable in the 19th century. Yet there's enough that Crabwalk shares with such novels that it is worth pursuing further the narrator's mention of this genre. Kolportage novels not only told sensational stories like Crabwalk, but also addressed political issues by refracting them through individual characters, as Grass does in his text. Intended and curated for a popular audience, they were stylistically midway between literature and journalism. According to Jessica Plummer, the Kolportage novel was the seedy shadow of the cheap illustrated daily. Kolportage novels and their authors were highly aware of newspapers as their counterparts and successfully turned the mandate of the newspaper to inform citizens into a fictional strategy, co-opting journalistic style, claiming a basis in authorized sources, and interrogating the ability of the burgeoning cutthroat competition for newsworthiness to provide readers with the truth, end quote. A journalist by trade, Glass's narrator similarly invested in questions of authoritative sources and accurate reporting, repeatedly demonstrating the historical research he has performed. Moreover, as he previously worked for the tabloids, he is no stranger to sensationalism's appeal to the masses. There is one more significant similarity between the Crabwalk and the Kolportageroman, namely their superficial portrayal of character psychology. Kolportageromane had little time to render a character's consciousness in depth, instead favoring a succession of dramatic events. This is also the approach taken by Crabwalk, and de Grasse, the character, demands that Paul, when he's writing, stick to surface-level description and not conjecture about people's thoughts. Quote, he strictly enjoined me from speculating about Connie's thoughts. He said, no one knows what he was thinking and is thinking now. Every mind is sealed, not just his. We see only what we want to see. The surface doesn't tell everything, but enough. So no thoughts, including none thought out ex post facto. If we use words sparingly, we'll get to the end more quickly. So Crabwalk does not aim for the resplendence of something like The Magic Mountain, a work mentioned by Paul, nor does it have the force of something like a work by Kleist de Grabe or Büchner, authors Paul heard about as a young, apathetic student. He preferred to hang out with the girls in the pub. Crabwalk instead presents itself as a self-consciously mediocre piece of literature, a Kolportageroman, which proceeds quickly enough to keep the reader's attention. We can read the staging of Crabwalk as a representation, we can read the staging of Crabwalk as mediocre, as a representation of one of political literature's key problematics, the tension between the inherent ambiguity of literary language and the necessary unambiguity of expedient political messaging. Even such mediocre literature has little power when compared to the force of the internet, Glass's text seems to suggest. Although Crabwalk is set at the turn of the 21st century, not just at the beginning of the digital age, the internet's effect on political discourse, its monopoly on the political imagination, is already palpable. In Glass's text, printed literature stands impotent in the face of websites and chat rooms like Connie's beloved Utsorge.de, which are constantly shifting their content and participants to meet the taste of, as Glass's literary alter ego would put it, the incessant now of a voracious present. In the Nobel speech, Glass had associated the phrase "to be continued" with literary fiction, a comment on the human drive to storytelling and the ability of stories to make us see the world anew. In Crabwalk, continuous storytelling becomes the domain of the internet in contradistinction to literature. And I'm coming to the end soon. In the last pages of the novella, Paul visits Connie in juvenile detention, and Connie seems perhaps to have finally snapped out of his obsession. But whatever hope this supplies Paul is short-lived. He finds out that Connie's right-wing supporters have created new websites in his support, promising to wait for his release. Crabwalk concludes with a fatalistic assertion: it doesn't end, never will it end, marking a sharp distinction between the literary text, bound and printed, unable to change, and the internet discourse, always shifting, adapting, exceeding the capabilities of the printed book. What Glass's novel could not foresee, of course, was the digitalization of literature itself, particularly how the far right would digitize the very literary genres that Glass's text portrayed as impotent and obsolete, thereby co-opting them into their political agenda. As recent studies have shown, the advent of online publishing has facilitated an increased reach of far-right extremists in the digital communication ecosystem. This is both because it has made self-publishing cheap and easy, and because right-wing extremists create websites where they deposit digital copies of books that they endorse. In these archives, canonical authors like Schiller and Homer share space with books advocating racism and anti-Semitism. Such mainstream works, write the scholar Jeff Boucher and Helen Young, quote, both legitimize far-right extremist fictions by their proximity and make claims about the whiteness of the Western canon itself. And I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I guess you need the micro to get.
Yeah, Sophie, thank you very much. I think the camera's over there. Yeah, I'd like to thank Sophie for a very compelling and thought-provoking contribution. It was a pleasure to follow her arguments, as I did not really know if the pre-circulated papers would be presented by their authors. The beginning of my response summarizes some of the points Sophie just mentioned, will then ask some further questions. In her contribution, Sophie asked a simple yet profound question. Why does Günter Grass, in his 2003 novella Crabwalk, and I quote, ventriloquize his intervention into contemporary memory politics through a bad writer? Or, I quote again, what does it mean in a text that was so clearly intended to become part of public discourse? Grass chooses a mediocre writer to be its narrator. This question is central to Crabwalk, especially since the narrator, a bad writer, is mentored by a creative writing teacher closely resembling Grass himself. This teacher tasks him with writing about his life as the son of a German refugee during World War II and the father of a murderer with far-right views. Sophie argues that Crabwalk highlights the impotence of printed literature in contrast to the continuous storytelling of websites and chat rooms. She writes, in Grass's texts, printed literature stands impotent in the face of websites and chat rooms. Continuous storytelling becomes the domain of the internet in contradistinction to literature. Crabwalk concludes with the fatalistic assertion, it doesn't end, never will it end, marking a sharp distinction between the literary texts, bounded, printed, unable to change, and internet discourse, always shifting, adapting, exceeding the capabilities of the printed book. Following Sophie's ideas, I'd like to explore three directions for further discussion by trying to think the difference of good and bad writer, of potent and impotent forms as a question of media. First, we might consider the broader media landscape in Crabwalk. Beyond novels and internet discourse, the novella engages with other media forms. Paul Pogrifke, the protagonist, is a journalist writing for newspapers, as Sophie mentioned. He references movies as sources of information for his novella. There's the factual book on the Gustloff, the ship on which Pogrifke's mother fled Soviet forces by Heinz Schön. And there's oral history, particularly from the mother of the protagonist. This suggests a more intricate media economy than the binary of internet versus printed literature. Each medium seems tied to a generation. Oral history and the great novel to the older generation, represented by Pogrifke's mother, and the Grass-like figure, newspapers and movies to Pogrifke's own generation, and website and chat rooms to his sons. Each medium frames ongoing discourse, including racist and anti-Semitic ideas, according to its technical conditions. As media theorists have shown, the new media often is framed as living in contrast to that older media. Sophie's terms potent and impotent echo this dichotomy. Potent media generate life and continuations, while impotent media appear static and lifeless. Second, this distinction between potent and impotent forms also implicates gender. In Crabwalk, male characters dominate the written word. The great novel, journalism, and internet discourse are all male spaces. Female characters, by contrast, remain excluded from textual authority. Pogrifke's mother is tied to oral expression and sometimes struggles with her dialect, especially in emotional moments. She needs a male relative to narrate her story. While the men in the novella often fail in life, they wield potency in writing, reinforcing a gendered hierarchy with the media and narrative forms. And you could also ask the question in regard to the political novel, is it a male genre? And as an outsider, I would be curious to know what the Caponeo group's reflections on this topic are. I'm sure you have had a lot of discussion on this topic. Third, we might ask, what does it mean for a medium to be potent, to create continuations or life through storytelling? Grass's novella suggests that potency lies in the ability to build communities or build communities. Media products become political when they foster connections and communications. This applies to Schön's book on the Gustloff that informs survivors of the sinking ship of different nationalities who meet at memorials, to Pogrifke's own writing, which is bound to provoke discussions when published, to website and chat rooms, which sustain extremist discourse, but also connect the murderer and his victim, and to Crabwalk itself, which ignited public debates upon its release. In fact, I found a newspaper clipping from the Süddeutsche Zeitung in my copy. I don't know if where the camera is again, but I found a newspaper clipping from the Süddeutsche Zeitung in my copy of the novella, recounting a Polish newspaper article in which the author, who hadn't read the book yet due to the lack of a Polish translation, was already commenting on it. Here, the mere existence of the printed book sparked discussion. So in summary, I propose 3 aspects for further discussion: the complex media discourse in Crabwalk beyond the binary of books and internet. Second, the interplay between genre, media, and gender. And third, the political potential of media as a means of building communities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, both of you. I kind of feel forced to answer very quickly the question if the political novel is a male genre, and we don't think so. Yeah, maybe we can add something to that, but I like to say that in the first instance. So, are there any questions? I'm sure, or Sophie, would you like to? Well, you don't have to answer or to say something to each point Elias said, but maybe you would like to say something to his response.
Sure. Well, first, I would like to say thank you. I think this is a really concise and provocative set of questions that you posed, and my immediate impulse would be to say yes. I think you're right about all of them, and I hadn't really thought about the media landscape in terms of generational divides, but of course you're absolutely right, and that also. But it's interesting that if we agree that, yeah, I guess if we think about, it's interesting to think about his mother, Tola, and what kind of media she relates to. But, you know, she's off. I think I agree that she's associated not just with oral history, but with the novel. She's always, a few times she says to Paul, you know, you have to write a novel about this. Like, she's trying to get this kind of monumental remembrance expressed. She's also the one who's obsessed with the physical memorial that's erected to Gustloff. But even in that case, it's not that she, you know, to your question of gender, it's not that she would write the novel herself, it's that she's trying to get her son to write the novel. I think I would agree with the group that I don't think the political novel in general is a male genre, but I think for Grasse it is, or at least in the world of this text it is. This is really the work of hashing it out, even if for better or for worse, or in a better or worse way, is really the work of men, and the women are on the margins, either irrelevant to the story like his wife, or sort of rendered kind of ridiculous like his mother. I mean, even his son, I think, is taken more seriously than his mother as a character, even though his son is the one who ends up being the murderer. But yeah, I would be interested to hear if there are other questions or comments.
Any questions? Oh, yeah.
Hi, Sophie. Again, really, thank you very much that you're attending at this hour. I haven't read the book, so it's just a very pragmatical question, but I was wondering how this far-right extremism storytelling appears in the book. How are the websites intertwined in the main narrative strand? I mean, are they quotes, or how are they represented?
They're not, sorry to cut you off. They're paraphrased or described by the narrator, but they're not quoted. I mean, there is one scholar who, I'm sorry, I can't remember her name now, but who has argued that the so-called Crabwalk form of the narrative is like clicking on hyperlinks. So there are people who have tried to make an argument that the text as a whole has some kind of, is somehow performing some the kind of relationality that we might get on the internet. But I would say it's actually, the text otherwise seems pretty conventional. It doesn't quote from these webs. So he stumbles on a website that someone under a pseudonym has been putting together, sort of commemorating Gustloff. And then a big part of where action is happening is this chat room where his son is chatting with this, his son sort of assuming the identity of Gustloff is chatting with this other teenager or young man who's assuming the identity of David Frankfurter, and they're kind of arguing, rehashing who was right. And yeah, I mean, there's like layers and layers of complication. The person impersonating Frankfurter presents himself as a Jew, but in fact, he's actually not Jewish. But Connie ends up murdering him, thinking he's Jewish, and so I won't get into all those kind of bonkers plot lines. But yeah, I think it is striking. I mean, in light of the texts that we've been looking at so far in the workshop that have been presented, that are really either themselves, as we've been saying, born digital, or heavily cite from digital practices. This is really much more conventional, and that it just describes what's happening on the internet. That is.
Hello. Hi, Sophie. Thanks so much. It was really, really great to hear your paper. I'm going to just attempt some thoughts on the political things you said about political discourse and maybe the idea of what the role of the mediocre writer is, because I don't know if I'm being a bit unfair to Grass, but I don't really also feel any need to be generous to him, that in using the, and maybe this is just maybe might be an obvious thing to say, but using the mediocre writer might be a way of trying to, in his eyes, underscore his own prowess as an author, in that he's got control over that and that kind of thing. And especially if it's, I mean, it is clearly, like you said, sort of like staged as a self-conscious intended intervention in public discourse. But going back to this idea of what a political novel is, one of the things we've been thinking about in Cambridge in particular, but more generally, is whether the political dimension is only when something really seeks to change something and seeks to move, and the aesthetics do something that push things forward in some way. Obviously, that could go in various different directions, but it seems to me, and I read this really a long time ago, like when it came out, I think, and I think I even read it in English translation because it was before I could read enough German. But where am I going with this? It seems like this is a novel that's kind of, again, yeah, correct me if I'm wrong and I'm oversimplifying it, but is a kind of a culturally pessimistic novel, and is therefore arguing in favor of that kind of middle generation, sort of a status quo of the middle generation, to please don't forget about us writers who write this literature, and that therefore maybe this is not a political novel, in that it's staged as such, and he wants it to be such, but it's not. It's actually a kind of a conservative upholding the status quo. And yeah, and I also agree that I think Grass would have loved us to think that a novel is a political form, but clearly there are lots of examples where it's not. And in fact, I'd say that this is profoundly there's no such thing as unpolitical, but it's the unpolitical in the sense of trying to uphold something that's already there and not allowing things to change. But yeah, there's just my random thoughts on it.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I guess I would, in my very limited understanding of this, I haven't thought about this nearly as much as you and this group, but I guess I was thinking that even a conservative attempt to uphold the status quo is itself a political act. I mean, at least in the context in which this text was produced, that is also a kind of politics. So that was one thing that was informing this discussion. I think, look, I'm not a super huge Gunter Grass fan. I think obviously he has many problems from his, what he was doing during the war to the exclusion of women from his writing to many other things. But I guess I would say that I think that the text is a little more complicated than that. Like there's just a kind of general, it is culturally pessimistic, but it's unclear to me exactly where that pessimism should lie, because every character is portrayed with such sort of ironic disdain. Nobody gets a positive treatment. No one comes off looking good in the end. And I think, that's why I think this novella made such a splash and was such a subject of debate, because people can really read it in different ways. Some saw it as a clear defense of German suffering, what wasn't able to be talked about before should be talked about. Other people have seen it as much more complicated and actually arguing the opposite. And I think, I don't know whether that makes it a political novel, but to me, that's what's interesting about the text, that it's because it has so many layers and so many different plot lines. It makes it difficult I think, to pinpoint and say this is exactly the one thing that it's saying.
I agree that I also remember enjoying reading it and thinking it was very clever, but yeah.
Yeah, that's the thing, like, it's too clever somehow. I think even the idea that this, like, the Crabwalk is the form, which he introduces already on the first few pages, there's something like a little bit cliche about all of it, but then it always takes these different directions that makes it, you can't simply say, oh, well, this is this trope he's working with. It always gets like a little bit weird. And that is those parts are what interest me.
I think also that too clever is also kind of like that painful self-staging of being too clever. And that's all of who he's trying to be as this political figure who is losing his authority.
Yeah. No, I agree. Yeah. There's something, as my students would say, there's something a little cringe about the way he appears as this writing teacher, talking about the great works he's written, which is of course a self-flatterization, but also not at the same time.
Yeah, but it is also a measure of self-protection.
Yeah, totally.
A measure of self-protection, because then he can say, I'm the writer who is more complex than that.
Yeah.
And
or he can say, you think this is mediocre? Well, I meant for it to be that way, right?
Yeah.
So I think in English, the phrase "what is to be done" almost always quotes Lenin. And I'm just curious about whether that would be true in German, because then that concluding line from the Nobel speech is really interesting about what he thinks novelists should be doing.
It's was tun, right? Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know if that is supposed to be a quote from Lenin. But it's not the last line. It's the last line of what I quoted, but then he has a few more paragraphs where again it becomes a little more confusing and like a little more sorry, I can't think of any words at this time of the night. a little I don't know if ironic is what I want to say, but again, it's a similar tone to Crabwalk, where it's unclear if he's mocking everything that he's saying at the same time, I think. So I don't think he's advocating any kind of direct action necessarily, or revolution, if that was your question.
Well, I guess that essay is predominantly about the formation of a party. So, and the vanguard. So maybe if you did read it in that way, you will know what those other paragraphs say, but it feels like maybe implies one solution to the problem that he sees, but no more.
Mm-hmm. Oh, thank you.
Well, actually, I have a question about what Tara said about authority and authorship, or I think that is linked here. I don't have a real question, but that keeps going on in my mind. Maybe if we say the political novel has to do with change or wants to change something, then the idea of authorship as authority is negated too. I mean, that is maybe what you wanted to say, but just to ask, is because if you want to change something, you don't stick to the status quo. So, and I mean, with Grass, we have a figure where we really can see how authority and authorship is, well, is same in his self-concept, so to speak. Yeah. Well, that's maybe a question to Tara, or it's no question at all. That would be fine too.
Sophie, do you want to say something? Because it is your stage.
I think my brain might have turned off. Please, so you go ahead.
Yes, I think so. And I think that is actually what a lot of contemporary authors are doing, at least. And actually, that's really helpful, the way that you formulated it for me, because I think that's one of the things that I want to be arguing about. How, I mean, I've got to think it through, because it is a cycle, and can you obviously these writers are also claiming some kind of authority, but I think what I'm arguing is that they're claiming the authority in different ways, and they're doing it in a way that is less self-centered. That's a loaded term, but less about themselves. I mean, you might argue that that can't ever be for any individual author who writes a book with their own name on the cover. It will always be them, but I think a lot of the practices, at least around those novels, are much more collaborative, community-based, drawing authority from networks and that kind of thing. And they're much more kind of like horizontal networks than the kind of like the ways in which writers in the past have referred to each other to claim their authority. So I think there is a sense of a paradoxical need to claim authority, to have a voice, but to try and undermine what the notion of authority is in a more conventional sense. So yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Sorry, and do you mean then that texts like that are more political than this older model of the author bolstering his authority or referring to other authors?
I think the way that you put it before, in that it's political in a different way. And I don't know if we've been talking about the difference between politics and the political, and I'm really not the person to be like recapitulating those discussions, but I think the kind of the fine detail, the differences and the nuances of ways in which things can be political in different ways is also part of what we're sort of teasing out. And also that changes as well at any given time, like how something can appear to be political in the sense of changing, bringing about or wanting to bring about change, and then that being done differently at different times.
I think I was reminded of a topology, a preliminary typology of a political novel that we set up in our Berlin team because we are co-authoring a collective monograph, and there were different versions of typologies. And one category was novels which are promoted and self-promoted as political, like they do not have, I mean, even those most recent novels, which I think you are referring to, Tara, right now in an affirmative way, they are also marketed as political novels, but with a different, under a different omen. I think then generation of Grass, who still kind of relied on a very stable idea of literary autonomy, because I think when Grass gives this, this material for political discussion, and then this political discussion goes in different ways. It's still against the background of the idea and the real existence of like something like literary autonomy and very established literary field, whereas nowadays these political novels or like this most recent politicization of novels is more in contact with actual politics, or different movements that are out there, which Grass, I mean, did not have that kind of a connection. So perhaps that's the difference. But I was just reminded of this, like marketing and self-marketing as political, because he knew that that will also kind of find resonance in that political discussion.
But especially Grass, he would also support SPD at the Bundestagswahlen. So, and he was, I think, connected to the unions also somehow, if I remember it correctly. So it was kind of a pre-form of what we see today, maybe. But I think you're totally right. And so
I cannot kind of formulate it to the end, but I think the matter of generation is important here. Yeah.
One of the things that's just occurred to me with what you're saying about the kind of the marketing of books as political is that has also often been associated with mediocre writing in the German context, at least. And maybe I think it's particularly, I don't know if in other, I think it's more so in the German case than it is in the UK context, which are the two contexts that I know. And different kind of mediocrity, but that kind of like, the sort of a sort of an established cultural critique of we don't read this because it only pertains to a certain audience, it only pertains to a certain type of reader, and therefore it's not literature. So in some ways, and I'm not saying that the marketing of that is reclaiming it, but I do think certainly a lot of the authors are reclaiming that no, the political makes it better, or it gives it a literary quality. So I was just made a connection between that idea of what makes a good or a bad writer, and that the ways in which the political is used as a labeling technique that can either be kind of derogatory or it can be something that is, I mean, it can be descriptive, it can be analytical, but it can also be something that's then taken back as something that's an empowering tool as well. And I think that's something that I'm really interested in the wider discussion about literature in Germany in particular. And I think that's it's always been there. It rears its head in every generation, but it's come back again with a vengeance quite recently as well.
And the discussion about mediocre writing lets me think of authors who use bad writing as a political strategy, like Kathy Acker, or how's he called, the French author, the AIDS book. So, yeah, he died of AIDS and wrote a book about it. He was also a photographer, friend of Foucault. I think it is his name. Yeah, Hervé Guibert. Yeah. And they both use like intentionally bad writing, not revised writing, as a strategy. I think that what is the strategy? I think those about Acker and Guibert both use bad writing, but are very different cases. With Acker, it's some sort of punk DIY background that informs her writing. And so the bad writing is seen as empowering, as something that goes against mainstream writing, against like polished writing.
I was reminded of Jared Kobeck, I Hate the Internet. who explicitly in the novel describes this as a bad book and talks about good literature as being this kind of middle class, bourgeois, urban fiction about people having dinner parties and sex. And so that, and includes in the book online reviews of the book that say his novel is rubbish and really badly written. I mean, it's doing some of the, in contrast to your description of Crabwalk, it is trying to model its aesthetic form on the internet. So it's jumping from one story to another without any kind of clear link between them. It includes kind of things that look like adverts, and it's very critical of a conventional novelist trying to write like the internet, where they just use kind of little sort of phrases that are borrowed from texting or so there's something kind of perhaps for this workshop, something about Quebec's text, and very much focused on Google and big tech companies' transformations of San Francisco as a formerly radical urban center that has priced out Black and brown residents and political residents and queer residents.
Which is, I'm not too sure how to link that to the rest of the discussion, but I think the idea of bad writing seems to me to be radical, whereas mediocrity, I don't see anything that could be radical about mediocrity, but yeah, I'm not sure how to link that to the rest of the discussion, but yeah. So are there any questions? Otherwise, we would make a break, right? Yeah. So then thank you again, Sophie, and have a good night.
We will be continuing our discussion now, and would like to hear if those who are attending online are still with us. If not, we will not use the microphone, so it's easier to talk. Okay, when nobody's replying, so I suggest we switch to that Decken micro.
Also, oh,
Good. We will have our second next session. It is a chapter from Elstermann's book, Digital Literature and Critical Theory, and it's about computer-generated text. We I will not go into many details. The text speaks for itself, but like some of the connections I will highlight perhaps two connections to our previous discussion. First is this aspect of the electronic literature, what we were talking about yesterday, and all this Charlotte's But
that sounds like a hobby.
Not like a hobby, not hobby. Like, let's say you have a fable for. I'm not sure about the word. Yeah, you worked. Okay, but there's, I think, more than just you work. You love it. Okay, so that is something we touched upon yesterday, and connected to that also this question of authorship, which we mentioned at several occasions today, especially in relation to computer-generated texts. What I liked about the chapter is that it makes it easier for literary scholars, to access the problematic, because it gives kind of these entry points, such as Sonntag, then Foucault and Barth, that is mentioned. So we also had this point of like whether the authorial intention is kind of decisive for recognition of a novel as political or not. Of course, this is like most important question when we ask about political novels. Can they be political without an intention being recognized? And does this intention has to be related to an author, or is there are there other instances which can be which an intention can be evidence? Yeah. So I suggest we just the discussion and we begin.
Actually, I don't know if I was happy, but I thought what comes up here again is our very old discussion about form and content. And I think one might put the question you just asked about the meaning again as a question of form and content. It's probably not necessary to say it, but we all want we form and content is collect connection. How to do that is always possible. So that are the questions we have reading political novels. And I mean, as you said, I'm interested in political because of many things, but one thing is that you can say, I think in Marxian way, that it is material, and material that's a materialistic poetic, because it works with the material, and then there is some work on the material asking about meaning. But you don't start with a meaning and find a form for it, but you start with a form, so to speak, and then something happens, something that you can't control completely. And what comes out by it is something that is first just language material, and then this is what we do with them. But so I think it's an interesting approach this text suggests for our question about form, how to think it through computer text. Because then the material is more complex. If you just have a question about language as material, well, it's mostly the same questions, but if you have computer-generated text, it's obviously about the work of material without intention.
I wanted to ask you, if you say form, you also mean something like infrastructure, because many computer-generated texts, like Hannes by yours, but in Miami, they're playing with the infrastructure of using text. So that's the whole point of the novel is that text that is produced gets worse and worse, because the author made decisions to feed the algorithm, the AI text that's already produced. Text gets worse. And I had to think of how many because there's also you have to go to the infrastructural level kind of because many books don't do that, but just an example of how infrastructure is used.
Yeah. And that would be a big question. Well, first of all, yes, I think the infrastructure is part of it. And speaking of the legal, the consent is kind of a infrastructural element, or is what brings in the infrastructure. So the idea is you need something to begin with. You need something that is the generator of your text. And,
like the book as a medium also has its constraints, but these constraints are largely forgotten because it's such a standard form. And then to invent new constraints, or on Twitter you have like certain number of characters. I think it's interesting to think about which constraints are forgotten, which are used.
I mean, you can put that, what you just said, into another wording and say ideology is construction that is forgotten to be constructions are thought of as nature. That is the standard definition, or that is one definition of ideology. And asking art for showing the structures we have forgotten structures. I mean, that could be one point of poetics that try to do something else, or to try to show how the infrastructure is.
And if you fully forward, it would be at the level of language, right? But,
I'm not sure if that's infrastructure plays a role, but perhaps word selection is important selection, like because we have to make some kind of selection from which these elements are involved, and then the text is generated. And I was thinking about unconscious, and like if you have like Ulpo and like similar experiments which were working with language material, they can be easily related to the functioning of cycle of simple and then also to psychology, to the psychoanalysis and analyzed by these models. I assume that that's not kind of applicable to computer-generated text, because yes, you can address the political unconscious to computer-generated text only if you forget that there is a pre-selection that made this text kind of possible of material, but actually a real analysis go into the analysis of the selection material, of the algorithms. Like you have to have some kind of a technical know-how to step behind the text, and it's not psychoanalysis anymore. It's something more like technology, I assume. Because it's not. We cannot read. I haven't read by bio yet. But I guess if I would read it by these, like psychoanalytical or related, or even also Marxist, like ideas of surfaces and depths, it would get me to some point. But I should understand how the text was generated, and also which apps or tools we're using.
I think that's true, but I think it was also in the text at some point that that the texts with which the AI learned to write were human-made texts.
Yeah.
And Bayor is a good example because it took 4 novels and trained the AI on those 4 contemporary German novels, and then let it write the text.
Yeah.
So you could also argue that Bayor's novel is a kind of digital humanities approach to those novels, and you can extract the something about our times by reading that novel, because it's like a meta novel about those 4 other novels who were not written by AI. And then it would work again to say.
But it's also again a selection, you know, like because Bayer could have selected, I don't know, novels from the platform we saw just now about like traveling back in like soldiers, and I don't know, you know, it could have been specific wrong, and then that's also like ideologically selection, and that's also, I mean, you have always some kind of human human instance somewhere in your plan. Yeah, so okay, that's it.
And also, again, good example by Bayor, because Bayor always talks like the computer does everything, but especially in his text, it's not true. He works a lot with them to make them look good. And also with the AI novel, he writes it in the afterword. He gave the AI he said where to continue, the words to continue. So again, there's the question of selection. This is the question of selection, but also the human element.
Yes, thank you. I was thinking about this, maybe to shift about the focus, but the question of unconscious and the predefined and trained algorithm. And I remember that maybe 2 or 3 years ago, there were discussion that texts that are produced by ChatGPT or some other algorithm, they have biases because they trained on the majority of text with the gender or some other biases, and they are reproducing this and even strengthening this inequality and these prejudices and racial and gender. So maybe somehow it's also related to unconscious, because of course the AI doesn't have some intention or some pros. He needs someone who will give them an input, but still in reproducing these prejudices, it would be so like a political conscious and representation of
the stochastic carrots like or article about this was called carrots, right?
So and this is we are dealing with the algorithms who are which are already predefined and already set. And we, because of this generating is based on this previously written text and given the numbers and the algorithm behind it.
I mean, that might be one of the big differences between AI generated text and written text, because
I just does everyone knows Rico? No, yeah. Did we say
all right? Okay, yeah.
Just because I think it's very interesting this comparison, but not all of us know what it's
Sure,
about.
I just thought because it came up in the text.
Yeah.
So Rico is basically a group of mathematicians and writers that came together in the 70s in Paris, and they tried to write or to produce art, mainly literary texts, by writing under constraints. The most famous example is La Disparition by Georges Perec. He wrote a whole novel without an E. An E, without the vowel E.
In French, it's really like amazing because this letter is omnipresent.
Yeah, right. And the idea is, and there is an Hegelian genealogy because Quinault was the Kojève reading about Hegel, so there's just something that is in the idea of Oulipo itself that you have to do with alienation and conventions. And the question about the artistic practice is always how to not get into the trap of convention, how to not go the way that is the most easy one because it has been done by so many before you. And so what I wanted to talk about, the AE generated text and the Oulipo text, the difference is I would argue that Oulipo is working, they put constraints on the artistic praxis for not doing something that is conventional, for finding new forms. Whereas the AE is working with conventions.
I think the question, I mean, you can, I assume you can program AI to forget conventions. I mean, you can also give it like write a novel without that's impossible, but it's perhaps like the authors, you know, like need some time to kind of begin to experiment with it in an avant-garde way, or perhaps what will be from yesterday about, you know, like these experimental novels is one way to, it's not AI generated, but it's kind of a experimenting with perhaps it's perhaps the impression we have at the moment about generated text that are completely automatic, and perhaps, you know, like these artificials and not being sophisticated or not being used to even sophisticated way by now what we can occur. So yeah. Sorry.
I think I understand. Oh, Charlotte.
Yeah.
I think I understand your point, Charlotte, and I agree that nowadays what AI do is to take the convention of the digital is a combinatory, so that's paradigmatic. So the artist who want to produce digital literature then has to work with the convention, which is totally the opposite to print literature, which is linearity and some other stuff. And then, but I think the question is from Oulipo, from any artist who is doing digital literature, it's a question about the relation with technology. And so I'm thinking about this work of Quinault from the Bohème one. I don't know if you have seen this. Yeah, the one you mentioned. So it's so the fact that somebody took the paper and do something else with the paper in the form of a book, which is the convention, but it's something different with the same material, goes to the fact of materiality you were talking about at the beginning. And then I'm thinking about, there is a work that I love that is called Diurnus Requiem by Diego Bonilla. He lives in US, he's from Mexico. And he, it's not easy to find, but what he does is work with femicides, with news from femicide. And from there, he trained an AI, produce poems and images. And I know him, and he told me he was 1.5 years work only with the bias of the AI, because the bodies of the women that appear to produce images, I will search it so we can see was such a bias, right? What she was doing, wide, and the kind of image, and this was okay. I'm working with femicide, which has to do with the fact that the violence to the women are seen as an object, and then I want to do a piece of work, and the piece of work is reproducing the same model, so I need to train. And there is a very deep work with language there, and this is what you were saying, Aurora, about training, because when programming, you are working with language. It's another language. I think this is the work that literature is doing with technology. In this point, I see something that is similar. It is working with the materiality in a different way. Kind of see the difference and know with the conventions. This is to break the convention also.
Maybe not a response with Veronica, but what I want to say about the whole context of this chapter is that the Annika writes mostly about some combinatory activities, but now the AI technology is actually a neural networks. They are not combinatory. That is completely different technology. And in this case, I think that we should not distinguish between this combinatorial algorithm generated text and this AI generated text. And the book was published in 2022. And this is the point where we as academicians, as scholars, we are not in time with the line of what's going on. And we are late because we are starting to explain and to understand what's going on, but it's already moved further, and all our conclusions maybe not so actual and true regarding what's going on. So when we are speaking about combinatory activities, that yes, but it's already in the fact of literary history actually. And I just wanted to call this, to emphasize this distinction that we are speaking about something that already happened, and now the situation is different. And please, let's not to mix these two ideas into technologies. So maybe it's even influenced to some extent the content of text, but the biases are still there.
It's a very naive remark. So that's what I was thinking about. I mean, I just, during the workshop, I felt very comfortable in my field because I work with printed books and they are there and I can go back to them as many times as I want. And I mean, I work with a stable corpus, and I was, when I thought about you, like your everyday research, or you with this huge amount of text on the platforms, I was just feeling quite better because I mean it's kind of daring what you're doing, and as literary scholars a bit uncomfortable, and then you work with unstable materials. So it's good to think about our discipline as collective endeavor. But I was kind of admiring what you're doing, because it's way more challenging, and also to write about these challenges we were addressing in the book, because they are constantly evolving in movement, and exactly what you said. I mean, it goes faster than we can publish and research.
Saying about emotional intervention. I started my current project. I was excellent to get into discourse math. It's like apps, essentially. I mean, it hasn't, I'm waiting every day for it to no longer be, partly because I haven't been able to keep up. I mean, partly my own lack of organization, but also I just thought it would be there. And even though it's still there, it's changed. And I don't have the technical know-how to know what to do with that intellectually as well, other than to say, the people that I'm interested in used to use this platform. I have got some of that material and I use that. Now they use a different platform, but also the capturing that, like, how do I capture? I can't capture Instagram stories in the way that I could capture tweets. So like, and that's also to do with the intervention of one, in this case, one man. You know, or actually, it's not only that, because there's also the original Twitter owners who sold it to him and that kind of thing. You know, that's sort of like, so it's like in all of these things are kind of ephemeral and moving anyway. And then, like you said, it can disappear and it can be kind of like that intervention as well. It's different conversation, but I also think that kind of the unstable kind of material that's digital, but reflecting on that can also help you understand, on the one hand, how stable to some extent the material books are, but also archives burn down as well, right? Or books do get disappeared. Like, so it is true that the Samizdat stuff is there as a kind of thing, but it can get lost, it can be deliberately extinguished, it can kind of like, I think all of this more modern stuff is helping me reflect on how I've worked on older projects that are to do with kind of concrete materials and so on.
Just a very short footnote to this. There are people, I'm not very familiar with that, but they're working on PDFs and screenshots. And I think this is, I'm not so sure if the term post-digital is really proper word, but I think that is how it is used right now to take the digital phenomena and put them into something that is more stable and the pre or post-digital thing. So the new Media, which is a platform working with PDFs. Although it is a platform, the texts that are published there are not old, so they could be kind of trained into the up-to-date technique, but they, as an aesthetic concept, maybe they use PDFs.
I think you're right, because it's in reaction to social media. Because I can say with German literature, the initiatives were not platform-based, and public literature for that reacts to the experience of social media are only now starting to think like Media or Enschlei, another example. But Media also has like the multimedia platform, right? It's all those videos and
what's the name again?
Media, like
It's I don't know if the word is, they were like word, it's curated by Jakob Nolte and
I'm not how information I didn't know 4 months ago, but you learned from a colleague that's and a business strategy document a discussion from 3 years ago that he needs like access, so he can get access to all issues related to the scandal. I'm not sure if he can get the access to his newsfeed from that time, but you know, like all kind of hashtag, everything which was kind of related to that. But he has to pay, I think, I remember, 5,000 euros is the price for the access to, you know, like all the posts.
And he did?
No, he did not pay it. He was hoping back then to get the access from another project which paid for it, but so, you know, like, they share the access data for him. Yeah.
Working in the Schreibers project, we try to get like the research access. I don't know if you have it for Twitter, but they never respond. So, but we downloaded somewhere too.
It's funny how come up with 5,000 euro? It seems to me arbitrary. It could be 10,000, 15,000, or 100. I mean, that is, yeah.
Yeah, but it's like with academic publishing, something right now, like
What do you think about the death of the author in this essay? I mean, perhaps it's just repeating what already said. I was kind of surprised to this is page 168, where the author says, mentions this belief that there is a plural intent even if it's unknowable, and then like computer-generated text, they kind of, the way we talk about them, think of them is that there is no actual author and there's no intention. And then comes the reference to Murashova, that the author. And I was kind of I had to laugh because when I studied literature, that was kind of still mainstream, and we were also told, and we were actually reading texts as if there wouldn't be more, like to think of an author would be like at the university back then. So basically, what we were trained is to think of text without an author. Yeah. But apparently, author was there to some extent, but it was kind of a good mention.
I mean, we all always knew that the author is not there. I mean, although we weren't supposed to say the author, but prefer to say structure or narrator. And yeah, if you had good teachers, they would tell you too. So, and I think it's interesting to read.
There was a smirk. Smirk. They look. The knowledge exists. Like you are too naive to think that.
I mean, couldn't we say it was a way to really concentrate on the text? I mean, if we compare what they have done in the 70s, the idea was, let's read the text, forget the author, and let's read the text. And that is not a problem anymore. Everybody is reading, or not anymore, but then. And what I think is interesting in these two passages, if we consider what we just said about the selection, because it is true, computer-generated texts seem to have no intention, but as Elias said, texts that are properly published as literary texts, they are the result of selection. You wouldn't publish every computer-generated text, but would decide which one of the thousands of possible computer-generated texts are published. So I think there's something left out.
Yeah, I was a little bored by this passage because I have the feeling every text about Bart's text in tonight talks about that there's a specter of an author and the topics, but I want to say something different about I think Hannes Bayor speaks of post-artificial texts. And what he means by that is that we have to get used to the idea that we cannot decide if a text is written by a human or and his idea is that we will come to a point where we just have to accept, because computer-generated text is everywhere. We don't know to which extent someone worked on the text, and we have to accept the post-artificial situation. This is the question: what we do with it?
Yeah, I think I'm not agree that I have to know some proofs or something, but at least from my experience and from what I'm observing, we still can distinguish between text written by human author or text written by narrative. Because because it's like the point of textual integrity, the author is still there, and so like an empirical evidence and distinguishing between these texts on our human minds, we still can do it. And I have some tests. There is, please guess, is it computer generated or human authored text? And also a few years ago, but it was before ChatGPT-4. Was more old technology, but there was bigger article about this experiment, and literary scholar was analyzing the text without knowing is it human authors or computer authors, and they distinguish it by close reading, by some analyzing the text, and that was true. So we can recognize.
But that's what I think the study makes no sense, because but first I think they were asked more people and they couldn't distinguish it. Only the literary scholar could distinguish it, but they don't think it's any reliable data if you ask one person. That's just doesn't prove anything.
That was just an experiment, and I don't know. In Russian, there are some tests which propose you to, I don't know if it's in German or in English, but probably there could be. And you yourself could try to just like an empirical experiment.
But the idea, the post-artificial situation is that the human works on it, the machine works on it, and you cannot say this part of the text is written by a human, this part of the text is by the machine.
It's not the question, because the point is that still the machine needs some input, and some purpose and some intention. Well, the human needs.
I don't say that there's no intention. I just say you won't be able to decide which parts of which, and you also don't need to decide which part of it is. I think that's not the important.
I think the question addresses the importance of the decision. It's important to decide if it is done by a machine or by a human, or how does it work when both of them work on a text somehow. Or I'm thinking in something, there is a group that is called Broken English. It's very funny because they did a piece of work that is made with this Familia de Bots family, and they did 16 characters in Twitter, and they talked to each other like if they were a family, and okay, they built the story. But suddenly Twitter, which is decide that the bots from Twitter decide that they were saying things that were inappropriated. So they start cancel some characters. And so all the intention of the author from Broken English was broken, because that it was something about bots. So this is not about distinguish what human and machine. It's not the best example for this discussion specifically, but what I say is like the piece of work looks their own path. And what is interesting to understand is how human and machine were working there together, and also how just finally something happened that has nothing to do with the project of the artist or the human itself. And yeah, now it's yeah, I think something else happened. This is what is interesting. I don't know. I totally agree that one day will be possible to distinguish, and we need to get used to the idea. If it's not a value, I mean, for some people can be positive or negative. It's another discussion.
Yeah, it's just quick. I was struck by the vocabulary she's using at some point, and she speaks about the feeling to be cheated. And I was, it tells a lot about our relationship to the text and to to the author. Yeah, I just thought it was interesting as a pick of a word, like, yeah, it's a feeling to be cheated and to be like, yeah, as if transparency was the main criterion for text and for how we are reading it. Yeah, I just thought it was interesting.
Idea of trust.
Yeah, exactly. Trust, cheating. Can you
even sorry.
No.
Yeah, but I remember in 2016, I think, yeah, or I don't remember exactly. There was a word that was given to a book. The writer was exist because there was somebody who did an experimental work. So and then the jury was cheat. They were like, oh no! From all these books, we choose the one that was made by a machine. This is happening now. If you want to apply for, if you want to send your manuscript, you have to sign that you did it and not an AI. And there's a question of authorship. There you see that the category is changing, but there is still this, say that, is this to lie, to use it, or I mean, it's.
Then
just a quick addition to this. I just remember that in some copyright contracts, there is new points about do I allow to train the AI on my text or not?
Oh yeah.
There is this special really cheating. I mean, like, literary text is there to cheat you in a way, or to seduce you, or to lead you somewhere beyond your comprehension. And it's funny that when this is done by some like non-human instance, kind of, even if we, and perhaps even if we imagine that it's not post-artificial or post-artificial, but completely done by artificial intelligence by computer, then you have some kind of aversion to it. And, but I think that's also a question of customizing ourselves, or like attuning ourselves with the idea that there will be not only non-human under the interpreters, but also non-human, like workers, users. Like perhaps at this moment we feel reluctant, so I think it's very reluctant. In 5 years, that might radically change.
Well, just a footnote. Then by saying this, I have to remember there is a famous example in English literature where a very famous author won the biggest prize for a novel at one point in his career, and he just made an experiment and published other books with another name, and really everybody thought that it was another author, and he gets to get the book prize twice, which is normally not possible. And it was also interpreted as break of trust and cheating. So maybe it's not all that new. It's just yeah, we have problem to accept that the author might die one day, and but it's not only machine related. It's really our myth of the author.
My question kind of tries to come to the end of our discussion. I don't know if that is
I think
yet.
it's also the
because I mean, I don't have an answer, but that might be a question for us to work on in the future. So the political novel and the computer-generated text. Can a computer-generated text be political? That could be one question, right? So, and I can imagine that we say yes or no. I think for both answers there are some arguments, but maybe the question, what is the political novel, then comes up in a new form. So we could ask about the intention, and I think that was one of our starting points to say, well, the political novel can actually be every novel, but we want to put these novels into the focus that are explicitly political. And I think we meant with that there is an explicit political intent. And now we might come to the problem that the computer-generated text can't be a political novel because there can't be a political intention. And if we say, yes, the computer-generated text could be a political novel, then we might overthink what we mean with political intention. So again, we come back.
You know what was called, we have to either by everything or immediately after. We have to give and perhaps people like Elias or something. That help us out with the algorithm, but it is actually just an experiment to create political novel of by following this prompt. Huh?
Prompt, you mean?
Yeah, a prompt. Yeah, that's. I mean, that's a joke, of course, but.
You can publish and guess the readers to guess whether it's written by a human or not.
No, but
just like an experiment, and what point is.
Well, my point was obviously to say maybe with a question with all our questions to the computer generated text, we come back to the question if the what is the proper English expression, Positionsbedingungen, the production conditions, how they do come in.
But I think that for instance, programming or the computer where you program or the resources, software, hardware, etc., has there is a political issue there. I mean, saw yesterday this an example with Nasser and the Arabic programming, and I think there is a question there. As I said, how hard is to train an AI to do something else than the conventional bias. There is always a bias, but I mean, I don't know if this will bring us to a political novel, but there are some political issues in the creation with narrative text, for sure.
Yeah, that's why actually, when we said this political, we also think in political novel. That's the point of discussion we came to. Synthetically, also intentionally.
Yeah, I read your paper.
Or has been recognized. It's not doesn't have to be been made by an intention, but it has been recognized by the reading communities as, you know, like some having a political weight. Where is this? That was for me interesting to observe how our discussion developed over the last 2 days. I think we were really discussing political dimensions of computer generation, generated text. But yeah, it would be interesting to ask the question if we can. Yeah, I think what we first print medium refers also to social media, like whether texts have been or the novels you showed us yesterday have been kind of recognized by reading communities as something which has a political resonance. You know? That's these two dimensions we have to take into account.
The problem is not enough to read generated texts.
Yeah, so like, yeah.
Then this two days might beyond the definition because no one discussed the political. There's not a lot of discussion around them.
We also not, are they not, because digital novels are so rare, their very existence is political, right?
Yes.
And as you were saying, even if you haven't, like, we talked earlier about gas, that we're talking about it in political terms, even though we've read it as well. I mean, so yeah, I mean, I'm not saying, not disagreeing with you, but there's also kind of, I mean, that I forgot to say yesterday, and that just knowing that they exist and reading about them, and it's fascinating, and it is kind of like, I don't know, automatically political. I mean, whether or not, if you also, yeah, even whether their content is or not, or whether they were intended to or not, the very fact that someone is even doing it. Yeah,
and they are working with technologies that are colonizing our life all the time, and suddenly they do something different with this materiality. I think the relation with technology is never neutral.
Yeah,
but to show that it's not neutral, it has a political impact. Yeah, but yeah, great question.
Yeah, maybe the gesture is more interesting in the result.
Of course, yeah.
No, but it's a personal opinion, but it's like a bit like the nouveau roman in France.
Yeah, totally.
It's really fascinating what they intended to do and how they did it. But then reading
after 3, you get tired of reading it. Yeah, true, totally.
I'm part of it when
I never related, but I used to love this movement.
When I learned French literature, yeah. But theoretically, it's really
conceptually,
and it questions a lot of categories we are taking as granted, and really makes you think about your practice and your readings. But then I don't think I will read the novels we were talking about.
That's right.
Yeah, but that's a point Kenneth Goldsmith or Annika you make, that it's more like conceptual art, not literature in a conventional sense. So maybe it's worth asking what's the conceptual art, then get the novels.
And what is wonderful is the process.
Yes. Thank you so much for joining us. Thanks so much for being here. We are after these 2 days of discussions, and we just want to. We will get back because. As Oliver mentioned in the beginning, we are like, first thing is that we will collect your contributions and publish them on our. I mean, they don't have to be more extensive than they are. We will work on them a bit more and do something like that. But we wish to collect them and publish them on our project page, and responses too. If you have material, definitely great to collect responses. And the second thing, something which we are very excited about is that we wish to, that's not the obligatory part, but if we wish to submit it to the novel section we're talking about, that will be great. Others. Or other novel states, but we will give you some, yes, we'll give you some sort of instructions or some kind of guidelines how to write, because we have established a small norm of, like writing stakeholders. I was thinking yesterday, like this climate fiction or oil fiction and things like that. This is we are totally deficient. That is very in our current collection we need novels of that kind. That could be something like that. But also what we were talking about now is now conceptual art or political art or novel, like our kind of conclusion on this from our discussions by now is that there is no one novel or one genre that novel or one table. When we invite you to submit these texts, to make your point, why is it from your standpoint of private politics you have in mind? Is this point? So
we're very open.
You're very open, yeah. But it's important, just not to say this is political, because it's blah blah. But kind of to elaborate on that a bit more. We'll not use it as a keyword or some kind of a chiffre, but to make your standpoint clearer. I imagine if you say I don't know something. This is one issue we mentioned often, like let's say gay novel like from the 60s or 50s, like or feminist novel. They were speaking in advance. They were speaking in perhaps those very subtle subversions, and they were not political in this at the time, like things forward, one is going or also under Jar, which came afterwards. Like at the moment when they were published, they were not wounded, not around some kind of program or something like that, but they became political afterwards. So that's also something you can consider. Think, like in the future, and if we mention it, a novel like Spirals, it's kind of perspective forwards in one sense. So that's what we do. But so yeah, keep in touch and finish.